The 2030 Agenda, proclaimed at the 2015 United Nations Summit in New York, is a global future contract which national governments are expected to adhere. This agenda includes 17 so-called sustainability goals that look good on the surface. A closer look reveals the same actors who want nothing less than full control over the Earth's resources. A single centralized world government and the enslavement of all human beings on Earth. In order to influence all areas of life and structures, these goals are not only pursued by the United Nations itself, but also by influential partners such as the World Economic Forum with its Great Reset. For more than 50 years, the World Economic Forum has brought together the most influential people from politics, business, science, the media, trade unions, NGOs, culture, and churches, and brought them together with the world's richest people. Moreover, they have been educating the world's corporate and political elite for more than 30 years. Great examples are Bill Gates, Jeff Bezos, Angela Merkel, Emmanuel Macron, Viktor Orban, or Vladimir Putin. They all went through the World Economic School as young global leaders. No wonder the forum's founder, German professor Klaus Schwab, is considered one of the most influential figures of our time. The United Nations Agenda 2030, a 17-point program for global domination and the enslavement of every nation. Goal 1. No poverty. End poverty in all its forms everywhere. Whole nations and their economies are being targeted and made dependent on governments to lead the victims into a mix of digital socialism and communism. The goal is to centralize all assets and resources, record them digitally, and distribute them or make them accessible only under certain conditions. To achieve this, however, people must be willing to submit completely to the digital industrial complex. Goal 2. Zero hunger. End hunger, achieve food security, and improve nutrition and promote sustainable agriculture. Agriculture is to be destroyed. Since farmers have been made dependent on subsidies, the globalists will be in good position. More and more new requirements are created that the farmers cannot meet, so they have no way to run their farms. So more and more farms disappear. The aim is to take over the entire agricultural sector of a country, and indeed of every country, by giant international corporations and investors. They could use genetic engineering and other harmful methods, produce inferior food, or simply leave the land fallow to create food shortages. Whoever has sovereignty over food controls humanity. Goal 3. Good health. Ensure healthy lives and promote well-being for all at all ages. The focus is on the digitization and centralization of all medical standards by the WHO. The World Health Organization can order medical measures all over the world under threat of fines and sanctions. For this purpose, the responsibility for medical measures of all kinds will be taken away from the national governments. The WHO will use the so-called pandemic contract to decide when and where to order coercive measures such as masks, vaccinations, tests, lockdowns, and quarantine. In addition, all health data will be stored in an international database and linked to the digital identity of every citizen. The health industry will be brought into line worldwide. All opinions and research in medicine that differ from the WHO will be systematically suppressed, persecuted, and criminalized. Naturopathic methods are to be banned from the health sector and replaced by educational offers, products and services of the pharmaceutical and chemical industry. The health of the people will then be completely in the hands of the WHO, which will be able to intervene in a regulatory way through the openly visible health data in case of non-compliant behavior on the part of the individual. This can lead to the individual being denied access to food and necessary medication. Goal 4. Quality education. Ensure inclusive and equitable quality education and promote lifelong learning opportunities for all. Global synchronization of educational systems and standardization of propaganda to ensure the same deep indoctrination of children and youth everywhere. For this purpose, there is to be a common core education, that is, a recipe with obligatory ideological content that is to be programmed into all people. This will lead to a totalitarian re-education in the interests of the elites, who will no longer allow any culturally conditioned values, gender ideologies such as LGBTQ, climate terrorism, and supposed health. Through the ingestion of pharmaceutical chemicals will be used to divide and control people more effectively under the guise of a new world religion. World Court, World Police, World Bank, World Health Organization, and digital world currency. Goal 5. Gender equality. Achieve gender equality and empower all women and girls. Gender diversity and LGBTQ are meant to normalize all artificially created abnormalities, up to and including pedophilic tendencies, not only to destroy the traditional family and thus the dissolution and disintegration of peoples, but also to create more divisions and interpersonal conflicts. In this way, women can be exploited even more effectively in wage labor by global corporations, while children can be educated by the state in all-day institutions, and thus be ideologically indoctrinated much earlier. By destroying the family bond, the digital state will take center stage, providing food and shelter under certain conditions, thus completely replacing the role of the family. Goal 6. Clean water and sanitation. Ensure availability and sustainable management of water and sanitation for all. Water resources are to be managed centrally. States are being pushed to privatize their water infrastructure and become dependent on corporations, which can then sell the water to the people at inflated prices. Sovereignty over water also puts people's health in their hands, as tap water in many places is already contaminated with chemicals such as fluoride. This could be expanded, leading to many chronic illnesses and poisonings, playing right into the hands of the pharmaceutical industry, which can then profitably market their symptom-suppressing substances. Since they will attribute the artificially created water shortage to man-made climate change, they will also take steps to minimize water consumption, especially in sanitation. Thus, it will be possible to ban conventional toilets and replace them with waterless ones. Whoever has power over water ultimately controls its rationing, who can use it, how much, and for what purpose. Goal 7. Affordable and clean energy. Ensure access to affordable, reliable, sustainable, and modern energy for all. For ideological reasons, the so-called renewable energies are to be subsidized with taxpayers' money, which will cause the price of electricity to rise immeasurably. People will be forced to finance developments that will drive them further and further into poverty and dependency on the state. People will be forced to use and install the new technologies for energy production. Since this is very expensive, people will have to rely on credit and eventually become dependent on the monopolistic financial system. Or they will have to sell their real estate at a discount to the same globalist structures and move to 15-minute cities. Entire sectors of the economy will collapse and small and family businesses will disappear. In this way, the market dominance of the large corporations can be further expanded. All energy supply channels will be digitized so that the consumption of all households can be analyzed in real time. Smart meters, IoT thermometers, and other network metering devices will make it possible to monitor and sanction entire households at the command of the government or artificial intelligence. In this way, energy can be rationed or cut off altogether remotely. The scarcity will not only lead to gigantic profits for the energy corporations, but will also make people permanently blackmailable and controllable. As technology corporations and governments continue to expand their power and influence, blackouts and rationing will become commonplace. Goal 8. Decent work and economic growth. Promote sustained, inclusive and sustainable economic growth, full and productive employment, and decent work for all. The side effects of vaccination campaigns will lead to labor shortages. Richer countries will rely on skilled workers from abroad as long as they are needed at all, leading to increased labor migration. This will have a negative impact on the countries of origin of these migrants, as their countries will be weakened by the lack of skilled workers and left to fend for themselves. After much of the so-called skilled labor has migrated, threatening to disintegrate the migrants' countries of origin, the global elite will begin to loot and sell off the weakened countries. Labor migration can also be used as an excuse to destroy the economy of the destination country. All that is needed is to import enough unskilled workers to cause as much damage as possible through lack of expertise, because the appropriate quality standards or procedures are not mastered. If unrest is to be provoked, it is enough to flood a country with migrant workers. This will lead to conflicts between the natives and the migrants, resulting in civil wars and destabilizing the country. The artificially created labor surplus will be exploited by large corporations to dictate working conditions. In this way, people can be exploited even more efficiently with the approval of governments. Values of freedom and human dignity will be a thing of the past. Once the local small and medium enterprises have been systematically destroyed and a large part of the population made unemployed, a partially socialist and communist structure can easily be imposed on the victims. In this way, housing, energy, or food can be made dependent on obedience or the carbon dioxide budget. Goal 9. Industry, innovation, and infrastructure. Build resilient infrastructure, promote inclusive and sustainable industrialization, and foster innovation. Nations are to be made equal. This will result in a lowering of the level of the more developed nations, so that all nations will be driven into unprecedented poverty. The wealth of the working population will be destroyed by creeping expropriation, while the profits of the global ruling class will increase immeasurably. The entire economy and all resources will be centralized and controlled through the introduction of command and control entities such as digital identity, carbon dioxide budgets, and digital currencies. All government agencies, police, and courts will be taken over by artificial intelligence and digital automated processes. National economies will be destroyed in favor of large international corporations acting in the spirit of the communist long-term strategy. Automation and robotics will drive people into unemployment and total dependence on governments, and lead to the abolition of private property and limited rights of use and ownership depending on the carbon dioxide budget and digital currencies. Remaining jobs and schools will be moved to virtual reality. Access to physical buildings or 15-minute zones will depend on digital access and identification systems. Living space will be relocated to thoroughly digitalized and fully monitored modular 15-minute cities and Chinese-style gigacities, where people will no longer be able to move freely due to carbon dioxide emission limits, so that one can speak of open-air prisons rather than living space. Goal 10. Reduced inequalities. Reduce inequality within and among countries.
The aim is to destroy all economic and financial independence by destroying carbon-intensive sectors of the economy, which do not correspond to the agenda of the World Economic Forum and the UN.
A universal basic income with corresponding control instances via carbon dioxide accounts and digital currencies will be able to directly influence or prevent consumption. Ethnic groups will be mixed to eliminate any cultural and religious individuality. Multicultural partnerships will be encouraged. Enforcing cultural and religious conflicts leads to extreme situations that create the basis for further governmental restrictions on freedoms. The educational, financial, and health systems will be centralized and standardized under the guise of peace and international understanding. A world religion and world culture are being introduced. To level the playing field, economic competition will be criminalized and private property will be nationalized. Entitlements to resources will be distributed according to the specifications of the new world government. Goal 11. Sustainable cities and communities. Make cities and human settlements inclusive, safe, resilient, and sustainable. The conflicts deliberately created and provoked by mass and labor migration will not only fuel unemployment and the competition it creates, but also increase crime to unprecedented levels. Civil protests and civil war-like conditions will serve as the basis for further depriving people of their basic rights and freedom of movement at the local level, imprisoning them in their 15-minute cities as if they were in a prison camp. There will be no freedom of movement. It will depend on the carbon dioxide budget and only allow you to stay in certain parts of the city or town to protect the climate and ensure the security of a 15-minute zone. Cities and settlements will be transformed into 15-minute gigacities with complete radical digitization and surveillance. Residents will be monitored in real time and punished for violations with fines, carbon dioxide budget restrictions, or imprisonment. All monetary benefits will be distributed exclusively in digital form, but only to people who accept the new system and adapt their behavior to the agenda. The monopolies of violence will be radically expanded and endowed with special rights to intervene in every sphere of life in case of violations of the agenda. Any citizen critical of the government can then be detained indefinitely or even killed without trial or charge. Brutal terrorist attacks and police raids are staged for public consumption to intimidate, silence, and incapacitate critics. Before the situation escalates completely, people will be disarmed and gun laws will be adjusted so that victims will have no chance to fight back against the totalitarian agenda. The state will pass new eminent domain laws to arbitrarily seize property. In the first phase of eminent domain, people will be blackmailed into making any kind of renovations to their homes in order to meet climate goals. If they do not comply and refuse, the second phase of expropriation will criminalize and prohibit the sale, rental, and occupancy of these homes. Millions of people will lose their homes and property, become dependent on the state, and have no alternatives to the 15-minute cities. Goal 12. Responsible consumption and production. Ensure sustainable consumption and production patterns. There will be carbon budgets based on the Chinese model of social credit points, where each person can be individually penalized or rewarded for their consumption or behavior. A digital identity will be implemented worldwide. This will be required as the basis for issuing digital wallets. In addition, as part of the agenda, implantable digital identities will be issued to each individual at birth. All previously issued documents such as driver's license, ID card, passport, birth certificate, land records, medical records, patents, tax number will be merged as a digital record for digital identity. A global digital smart contract instance based on artificial intelligence will be created to govern all diet, usage, health, movement, and temporary ownership rights. This will determine who can temporarily own or use something and for how long. Allocation of mobility rights. determining if and with which vehicles and within which radius a person is allowed to move. It also regulates what they may eat and what substances they must have injected. The Universal Monetary Unit, a digital world currency based on a central bank digital currency, becomes the only means of payment. It will primarily guarantee unrestricted transactions between governments, banks, and corporations. The money of the basic income recipients, on the other hand, will be tied to conditions and constantly readjusted depending on the obedience of the system. Digital currency will have an expiration date and be programmable. Every person will be controllable via carbon dioxide points, and the United Nations will be able to determine where the digital money can be spent. The tax and control authorities, health authorities, doctors and hospitals, and other institutions subordinated to the UN will have access to all data in real time and partly automatically. In order to be able to intervene in the consumption behavior of all people with prohibitions and punishments, vaccinations, medications, and other medical measures will be linked to the wallet so that rewards and punishments can be given automatically as needed. All vehicles are monitored in real time in the event of non-compliance with the zones and areas authorized for the vehicle. The driver will be warned in the first phase and penalized with the immobilization of the vehicle in the event of further non-compliance. All products and services, as well as the way we live, will have a carbon footprint. This will be digitally evaluated and rewarded or punished with points, which will also affect the basic income. This will make companies controllable so that they will be prohibited from producing certain products or providing certain services if they violate climate targets. To facilitate the coming expropriation, a registration and verification requirement will be introduced for precious metals and valuables of all kinds. People who own gold and silver and have not registered it will not be allowed to sell it to official entities, as the purchase will only be legal for registered holdings. The expropriation of land to build, for example, wind farms, solar farms, or other regenerative systems, is easily enabled on the basis of climate goals. People who cannot afford to rebuild their homes to the latest climate standards will not be allowed to rent, sell, or occupy them. In the case of violations, the victims risk having their CBDC credit reduced to the point where they can't even afford food. The concept of purely utilitarian buildings, where people either sleep, eat, work, or are entertained, serves to further isolate people from one another. The family is to be divided and separated as much as possible in order to control the individual more easily. While ordinary citizens will be dispossessed and deprived of all their freedoms, the elite will continue to rule without restriction and enjoy all the comforts. Goal 13. Climate action. Take urgent action to combat climate change and its impacts. The pseudo-scientific religion of an allegedly man-made climate change and the associated fear-mongering are intended to enable the global synchronization and power grab of the elites and end-time sects. The expropriation and rationing of all the world's resources is to be imposed on humanity by a totalitarian socio-communist eco-dictatorship through manipulation, violence, and blackmail. In order to completely unbalance the natural processes of nature, the atmosphere is deliberately contaminated with toxic chemicals. Under the pretext of food shortages, pesticides, herbicides, and fungicides are increasingly used. To this end, natural foods are equated with artificial foods, and the labeling of genetically modified foods is abolished. This is being done under the guise of the Codex Alimentarius, the World Health Organization, and the Food and Agriculture Organization. Plant-based foods will be modified to the point where essential ingredients are no longer included and must be supplied externally through supplementation to further increase dependency on the pharmaceutical industry. There will be two classes of food based on carbon dioxide budget and consumption control via digital currencies. Psychoactive substances will be processed as food or administered as vaccinations to better influence and control people's thoughts and actions. Medicinal plants that could promote our health or alleviate the suffering of the sick, and that currently compete with the products of the pharmaceutical industry, will be banned and their use made punishable. All food, energy, water, and everyday products, including mobility, will be given a carbon dioxide imprint that will be digitally recorded and assigned to the state-imposed digital identity. In order to achieve the unattainable climate goals, individual transportation will be abolished and replaced by self-driving autonomous vehicles that will only be available on a rental or subscription model, if they have the appropriate carbon dioxide points. This will be touted to people as safer and more environmentally friendly, but will only serve to restrict freedom of movement and total control. Critics and opposition movements that do not believe in man-made climate change or question the 17 goals of the UN Agenda 2030 will be persecuted and silenced. Goal 14, Life Below Water. Conserve and sustainably use the oceans, seas, and marine resources for sustainable development. Waters and their resources will be centrally registered and managed, with access restricted to selected corporations. Shipping and private and commercial use of oceans, lakes, and rivers will be further restricted and allowed only under certain conditions, which small fishermen will rarely be able to afford. Large corporations, however, will be allowed to continue fishing because they will receive the necessary capital through subsidies to comply with new standards, such as the digitalization of fishing quotas or the conversion to electric propulsion. This will make fishing less attractive, the supply will be reduced, and the few large licensees will make huge profits. Conversely, this will lead to even greater poverty in third world countries and mass migrations that will destabilize the richer countries as well. In addition, the chemical industry will exacerbate the acidification of the oceans, which will have incalculable consequences, including the extinction of fish. Goal 15, Life on Land. Protect, restore, and promote sustainable use of terrestrial ecosystems. Sustainably manage forests. Combat desertification, and halt and reverse land degradation, and halt biodiversity loss. All land and resources will be digitally mapped. Environmental and conservation zones will be expanded to drive people into 15-minute cities. Agricultural land will be centrally managed and controlled so that its use can be banned at any time, making it impossible for farmers to grow food. This will create artificial food shortages. Traders will be required to obtain special licenses. The use of natural areas such as forests, parks, mountains, meadows, wetlands, and arid areas will be more regulated and restricted, or only allowed with a certain carbon dioxide credit. For the alleged prevention of droughts and the expansion of arid areas, chemical and technical means will be used to interfere with the natural processes of this earth. This will further destroy the biosphere, which is one of the goals of the technocrats. Targeted chemical eradication of plant species and their replacement with genetically modified, non-self-replicating plants, which not only have no added value, but will also destroy the balance of nature. Goal 16. Peace, justice, and strong institutions. Promote peaceful and inclusive societies for sustainable development. Provide access to justice for all and build effective, accountable, and inclusive institutions at all levels. The monopolies of violence will be expanded in order to impose destructive and artificial concepts of society on the peoples of this earth by force and blackmail. This will lead to flight and civil wars. Traditions and any individuality of peoples will be suppressed in order to create a uniform world society. Historical monuments and works of art will disappear from public view. A world religion will also be enforced, forcing people to submit to satanic practices. The forced intermingling of races will be enforced in order to read away any individuality from ethnic groups in the long run. Mixed marriages will be rewarded with points and higher social status. Individuals will no longer be able to fall back on their cultural foundation. To maximize confusion, robots with artificial intelligence and artificially created gender variants will be socially equalized and promoted. Under the pretext of the best interests of the child, it will be made easier for the executive organs to take away the children of families that are critical of the government. Goal 17. Partnerships for the goals. Strengthen the means of implementation and revitalize the global partnership for sustainable development. The structure behind the United Nations is the leading authority and holds all decision-making and executive powers. The nation-states will disappear after the infiltrated governments have acted as lightning rods for the people and as pathfinders and then become obsolete. All national laws and jurisdictions will become obsolete, as they will only exist from the one central structure in the form of artificial intelligence. The plan of the elites is very clear. They want to lead us into a dystopian future in which we will be deprived of all freedom. The national structures that are supposed to protect us are not standing up against this agenda, but against the people. This is no wonder, since every government today is already infiltrated and in maximum dependence on the globalist structures, which also control the monetary system. They want the people to completely surrender their own freedoms and surrender their own future to destruction by accepting the New World Order. It is up to us as the whole of humanity to do something about this agenda, and we must do so before it is too late.